Coogs house. Yes, last weekend was embarrassing, but Houston looks to get back on track, and the keys to the game are relatively simple this weekend in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day, which means first listen each and every day here at Locked On Coogs. If you want to the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. What do you tailgate with for an 11 a.m. game? Now, this one's a roadie, a little different, but homecoming next week's also at 11 a.m. Are you going coffee and coffee drinks? Are you going donuts, beignets, kolaches? What's on the agenda for a morning game, 11 a.m. kickoff tailgate? Tell us what you're doing. Today's show is brought to you by Mazda, making moves forward. We got more on that fun later. Houston heads to Oklahoma State this weekend, looking to get back on track after an embarrassing loss last weekend. Keys to victory, going to be our first segment. How does Houston come away with the victory in this one and get back on track? Second, I got a couple key matchups I want to get to in this one as well. And last but not least, what is at stake as Houston heads to Stillwater this weekend? Now, keys to the game. I think the first one is relatively simple. This will come up over and over and over again in today's episode. Houston needs to run the football effectively. That is what Slade Nagel wants to do. That is what this offense is built to do. And frankly, while it's only year two of the rebuild under Willie Fritz, with all of the new names and folks in the program, it's worth mentioning that this is what the roster is built to do. This is what it's designed to do, is to run the football first, foremost, and most dominantly. Against Texas Tech, Dean Connors, running back, never got going. Connor Wigman, who went out in the second quarter hurt last week, is supposed to be making his return this Saturday. He's active in the run game, but when the run game is not going outside of him, the pocket collapses around him. So you got to make sure you get things going for that. Fat Burnett, should be back this week as well, or should be more involved. He was a little back last week as he continues to come back from that hand injury. Look, this is just bluntly not the same kind of front seven. Certainly not the same kind of linebacker and defensive front that you saw last week against Texas Tech. I don't even mean that necessarily pejoratively against Oklahoma State either. It's more just that, that was one of the best front seven defenses you're going to see in America. And even at that, it's probably really just five of them. I look at what Texas Tech taught us a lot about this offensive line, and you struggle in pass rush, and you got bull rush and juked and dumped or whatever. Gave up a lot of pressures without having to see a lot of blitz either, right? And this week, you can negate a lot of those problems by establishing the run early and getting after it. I imagine you see some split zone action to get Tanner Koziol involved in the blocking as well. If not Luke McGarry, the backup tight end, you could see him on the field involved in a lot of that. Two, I really think, though, that you're going to see Houston focus running the ball early and do what they have done best for 4 out of the 5 games thus far this season. Second key to the game is to contain Sam Jackson V. I am projecting him to get a lot of the snaps at quarterback in this from Oklahoma State. They're down a couple QBs up there in Stillwater. Sam Jackson V he was recruited to play quarterback at high school, and he's made the switch to receiver at Auburn last season and as a receiver at Oklahoma State now. And I think you got to keep him in the pocket. You got to contain him to the pocket. Bluntly, he's quick, shifty. They moved him from quarterback to wide receiver for a reason, right? Like he's pretty dynamic with the ball in his hands in that way. I imagine you see Houston spy him with a linebacker, nickelback, or safety, somebody kind of keep up with him in terms of foot speed. You could also see a lot of contain where pass rushers maybe aim to rush wide and flush him up the middle as opposed to running on the interior gaps and flushing it out to the perimeter. I could see Houston doing all of those things to kind of keep things in front of them in this one with Sam Jackson V at the quarterback spot. We haven't seen a whole lot about what kind of offense he'd run as the starter there. He just hadn't had enough reps or time on task, and he had theoretically a week of practice this week where he got starter reps, right? And so Houston may have to do some adjusting after a series or two to make sure they understand what they're into. But you can anticipate, I think, that he's going to do a lot of running. His throwing motion looks a little awkward, has some pocket visibility issues, seeing over the line, that kind of stuff. And again, one of his benefits is he can really, really run the football. You saw his ability to do that as a wide receiver before, and you're seeing it now when he takes his turn at quarterback. Now, Cody Stovall mentioned that you could also see them go to some wildcat looks. I don't know if they need that if they have this much of a running quarterback option. But we'll see what they go to there. Regardless, if he is the man, like I think he is for Oklahoma State, Houston's got to do a really, really good job of keeping him contained in the pocket, not making those big electric, wake up the crowd kind of plays on the perimeter. Last key to the game for this one, I see with Houston is they've got to just play cleaner. Willie Fritz has said since he stepped onto campus, the Cougs can't beat the Cougs. And by and large, in the games they win, Houston mostly doesn't. They try to give it away against Oregon State, absolutely, but generally speaking, since Willie Fritz got to Houston's done, when they've won games, has done a pretty good job of not beating themselves. That includes penalties. Obviously, 5 penalties called last week, including a couple of offset, or additionally with a couple of offsetting, I should say, that made it feel like a lot of flags were thrown on Houston last week. And some of those are like, I still think the kick catch interference is egregious. I think the guy fumbled out the back of the end zone, all those kind of things, right? Or the side of the end zone, I guess, really. But doesn't matter when you're getting those flags called. You can't have that happen. You also got to take better care of the football. Houston had 1 turnover in the first 4 games, had multiple on Saturday. Part of that's having your backup quarterback in trying to chuck it deep, but you also opened with a fumble on your very first play of the game. That was pretty ugly. The backwards pass that was kind of almost a forward pass, but didn't have enough evidence or whatever to throw that. I I see those kinds of mistakes and think even look, Oklahoma State's not great in terms of talent. So I don't mean that's like it's a for sure thing. But even against another Power Four team that is rebuilding, and Oklahoma State's a much earlier process in their rebuild. They just fired the coach earlier this season, right? Even against another rebuilding Power Four team, you cannot turn it over with that kind of frequency and expect to have success. And that is when we talk Cougs beating the Cougs, like case and point numero uno, right? Like there's just not a path to victory if you're turning it over and committing penalties, right? That's before you get to making the wrong read, hitting the wrong hole, running the football, right? Any of that kind of stuff. If you are turning the ball over and committing penalties, which is what Houston has said that they're trying to weed out, you know, it's going to be hard to win any football game, even this one. Now, for what it's worth, they have had clean games so far this year, and they've had clean games under Willie Fritz. I don't know that it's like something they can't do necessarily. I'm just making sure that that is one of the things they've got to do. This one is be clean and crisp. I thought about incorporating things like being awake, alert, and ready to go too. 11 a.m. Central Time is a weirdly early time to kick off. It's not like they've never played that early before or anything. I frankly almost wish they were playing Friday night instead personally, but that's neither here nor there. Um, I will say that it is going to be interesting to see if either team has trouble waking up in this football game. A couple years ago, we'll talk about this in the final segment again, but I 100% would have assumed that that was going to be a thing that the Holgorsen Houston Cougars are going to struggle with, right? And I probably defended Holgorsen longer than most content listeners or content creators you listen to. Um, but that I would not have had confidence that Dana would have had them ready to play at 11 a.m. on a Saturday in Stillwater, Oklahoma, right? I don't think it would be on Willie if this team is not awake. There's got to obviously be some accountability if a team doesn't wake up. But I think that's part of the playing clean indicates that you are, right? So playing clean, third key to the game in this one. So running the ball, establishing the run, containing Sam Jackson the fifth at quarterback for Oklahoma State and making sure he's in front of you and not making those dynamic plays and being sure you keep a clean sheet and play Houston Cougar football as clean as possible. I want to talk about some key matchups in this one as well. Spoiler, there's a handful of linemen in there to talk about. But before we get to any of that, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at DoorDash. Now, DoorDash is asking folks about getting streaks going because it is almost the weekend. It's time to look back and crown the MVP of last week. Now, it's hard to figure out who delivered in a loss like that one, but who delivered powered by DoorDash, just like every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order. Some players did deliver when it matters most, and let's break it down. I thought Amari Thomas on second watch for the Houston Cougars actually played pretty big. Obviously, he has the touchdown catch, so it feels kind of like an easy, cheap pick here. But he actually was open on a handful of routes and did not get the football. And I stress and will continue to stress if Houston had time to deliver the football, they had stuff open downfield like Amari Thomas and his teammates, Go Young, Tanner Koziel, et cetera, right? And so they didn't get the football. It didn't seem like a statistical breakout in that kind of way. But Amari Thomas continues to play through all of that. No hesitations, no delays. If you've been watching week after week, you know when a fluke. Amari Thomas has been on streak all year long. And just like Amari Thomas delivered for the Houston Cougars, DoorDash delivers your Saturday's DoorDash streaks. You save energy. You save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season long. You could save $250, including $100 on DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo code goes through November 18th. Today's show is also brought to you by everybody over at FanDuel because the NFL season's here. FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, get $300 back in bonus bets if you win it right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. This weekend, they got the Houston Cougars. I know I'm talking NFL football, but the Houston Cougars as 14.5-point favorites as they're recording this episode. They think Houston's good. If you agree, you should go hit that on FanDuel, put $5 down, get $50 back in bonus bets. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com, download the free FanDuel app today, and get started. Parker Ainsworth, Locked on Cougs here. And I think the matchups this weekend are interesting because at some level, a lot of Texas Tech's guys are kind of playing for whatever's next. So they think they're NFL guys. They're trying to get in the transfer portal. They're trying to put video out there for what's next. And I could see a bunch of guys making really Herculean individual efforts just to try and make themselves look better. Right now, they've had a lot of roster shakeups and chaos, and admittedly, that made this a little bit harder of an exercise for Houston versus Oklahoma State. But I hesitate to throw him under the bus here because he's a really good dude. But Dalton Merryman has to win battles versus Wendell Gregory. Wendell Gregory is a defensive end. He's a good pass rusher from Oklahoma State. He's lined up more on the offense's right than the offense's left this season. However, he has lined up on both sides. After what happened last weekend with Dalton Merryman and Texas Tech's front four, I'd imagine he thinks he can get a better lick, so to speak, on that side. Gregory's been, like I said, over there a lot this season, and he's kind of their best pass rusher by a lot. Now, none of their guys look like what Houston saw last week by any stretch of the imagination, but Wendell Gregory's probably their best up front. He had 3 sacks in his freshman opener against UT Martin, and while it's not like the greatest opponent or a great measurement, it's worth noting that's the most sacks a freshman has had in their first game of college football in Big 12 history. Obviously, when he's like line up on the left side, he needs to Alvin Nivaselli needs to win those reps as well. Like, I don't mean that's just a Dalton Merryman problem, and they will probably also use chips and max protects and things like that if things get to be a little haywire. But Dalton Merryman had really bad tape against Texas Tech. Frankly, there's moments of that film that feel more like a blooper reel than a actual game, right? And I think part of the frustration there is like Dalton Merryman has played well in the past. He can be better. He has a lot of great physical tools, and then he's also a great kid. He needs this to get turned back around in the right direction. I think this is a great weekend for him to do that, and I anticipate him having a pretty strong outing. But I will say he's a matchup Houston's got to win. If for no other reason than the guy standing behind him throwing the football, Connor Wigman, is banged up. And I could go on about the injury being a weird injury where they said upper body injury and then concussion protocol, but by Wednesday he's practicing and Thursday he's taken off the injury list and whatever. But regardless of whatever happened or the injury itself, Connor Wigman is banged up. And I fully believe all of the concussion protocol stuff. It was just interesting that he's already taken off of it. Um, I Dalton Merryman and Alvin Museli got to win their matchups to make sure he stays upright, right? At some level of this one, they've got to do that and make sure he stays upright and ready to play football. Now, another matchup I think is important in this one that will help that as well is Dean Connors, Houston's running back, versus Brian McCoy, the linebacker at Texas Tech. Now, Brian McCoy lines up all over the box, multiple linebacker spots. Sometimes he puts hands in dirt, sometimes he pass rushes, etc. But he's basically always in the box. So between the tackles, first few yards off the line of scrimmage, he's always in that area. Now, he's played nearly 300 snaps. Less than 30 of those were outside the box per Pro Football Focus. And Dean Connors was visibly frustrated in the press conference after Houston versus Texas Tech. He talked about wins and losses being imposters, which is a great quote, I thought. He was curt, he was short, he was not disrespectful, but he was not. He was talking because he had some sort of an obligation to speak on behalf of his teammates as a leader, not because he was going to enjoy talking about the game, right? He was just not in a good mood about it. And I think this is a game for him to kind of get that mojo back. Look, he's been running the ball well thus far this season. Tech was just the anomaly in a lot of ways. And when Dean Connors and Houston are running the football well, they win time of possession. They have to pass the football less because they're not getting into those second and longs and third and longs. It means less hits on Connor Wigman as well, for what it's worth. I imagine when Dean Connors is running some of that inside zone and split zone kind of actions they had so much success with their first 4 games of the season, that the guy tracking him or kind of keeping him mirrored will be Brian McCoy, kind of preventing the cutbacking in zone and that kind of stuff. And he 6 foot, 225 pounds, big strong kid, right? It'll be a test. I think Dean Connors is elusive to win this one, though. He's got some wiggle to his game that, for whatever reason, we said all year long, people might not see coming, but it's definitely there. And I think he's got a real shot to kind of get his game back on track this weekend. Carlos Allen versus Austin Kowecki is my last matchup here. Houston's got to win. Now, it takes very little listening to the show to know that I love Carlos Allen. I love big defensive tackles. I love tackles that can move. He's all of that. Great story coming from Kansas to Houston, moving up in the world of Power 4 football, and looks like a pro football player. I mean, really, really powerful guy. He just had 6 tackles last week. Did deal with a lot of double teams. I had him down as having no pressure. I guess PFF had him with 1, so we'll give you the one they had down, Carlos. But really, his double teams kind of let an occasional play get made by Eddie Walls or Latrell McCutcheon, but Houston had trouble capitalizing off of him drawing all that double team pressure, that double team work. And I imagine Oklahoma State also double teams him in this game. But Carlos Allen has to win his matches against Austin Kowecki of Oklahoma State, their center, because it's the thing that puts the most bend on the offense. They got to start double teaming, pulling guys over, at least somebody else rushing. And unlike we talked about earlier when Houston was on offense, on defense, Houston does blitz a decent amount. They do send pressure. And if you're double teaming Carlos because he's forced your hand that way, it means the blitzer is more likely to come through scot-free, right? That opens a lot of things up. I also think, and this is obviously just going by like very raw stats, but when Carlos Allen has like 8 or more tackles, they're a lot better football team than when he has like 5 or 6 tackles. And I think that involves kind of getting him going at 11 a.m. on Saturday. And so I'd anticipate them probably twisting on a 3rd and long, so that try and free him up, but also a refocused Carlos Allen in this one. He's so good at playing down the line of scrimmage, so good at widening the ball and moving, kind of puncturing the line and then moving things side to side. Great hips, great feet, good strong base. I really like watching Carlos Allen play football, and it's nice because when he's a defensive tackle and on top of the center, it's in the screen of the television a whole lot. So something to keep an eye on in that one. Houston needs to win that matchup. Houston's got to win the right tackle Dalton Merryman versus defensive end matchup against Wendell Gregory. They got to win the running back linebacker matchup of Dean Connors, Brian McCoy, and they got to win the defensive tackle versus offensive center matchup of Carlos Allen and Austin Kowecki. I think there's a lot on the line if they can get those things accomplished this weekend. And I want to talk some about what is at stake for those Houston Cougars. But before we get to that, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Moz. This episode is brought to you by Moz, moving the game forward for those who believe it's not just about playing the game, but it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board, and move crowds, move culture, and keep the game moving forward. This week's moment we chose not because he was my DoorDash streak guy as well, but Amari Thomas's touchdown catch and subsequently them going for two right after and getting it did cut the score down to a 2-score game right before halftime. The defense had bent, not broken at that point, and you felt kind of okay. If Houston's going to turn this around, that's kind of what it's going to look like. Is a big play there, defense stopping another big play, and suddenly Tech is kind of wondering how the game's so close. It felt like that was about to happen, and man, that was actually a really good feeling. Now, when you follow what moves you, much like those good feelings, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. And I think a lot of people looking at this game as a Houston bounce back, Houston get right. And I think on paper that's fair. I think on the field it's going to be a little harder than that. I see the 14.5-point spread. I think that's a lot for a Houston Cougar team that has a slow-paced offense. I'd probably take Houston, but not the points there if I were telling you what to do with your life. But you should do what you want to do with your life, obviously. I'd love to see Houston blow someone in conference's doors off. That'd be fantastic. But this weekend, okay, unless you think I'm looking at stakes here. What's at stake for Houston? Unless you think Oklahoma State is going to go 1-11, they're going to beat someone in the Big 12. Now, you might think they're going 1-11, and that's different. But unless you think they're going 1-11, they're going to beat someone in the Big 12, and you can't let it be you. If it is you feel like you got this 2-game skid, a step way back at this point in the rebuild, and it feels like suddenly you're honestly you're behind the 8 ball a little bit as far as where you are in your process of rebuilding this program. Look, the transitive property is not perfect as far as college football scores go, but Baylor beat this team with their second quarterback in, who will not be playing this game. It doesn't sound like they're down to their third string guy, which might be a wide receiver. Baylor beat this team with their second string guy by 18. Arizona beat this team last week by 28. You got to play both of them later this season. Frankly, at a national picture perspective, Tulsa beat a much more healthy, a much more intact Oklahoma State team a couple weeks back in Stillwater, right? Houston's got to win this game, frankly, to find a perception problem if they don't, right? I'm not saying I would love, and I will talk myself into Houston winning every week. Don't get me wrong there. However, I don't know that realistically Houston has to go undefeated the rest of the way to call the season a success, right? I do think, though, there is a perception aspect of all things college football. When they pick the college football playoff teams by a bunch of people sitting in a room and picking their team or picking their 12 teams, perception matters, right? This is not college basketball where you can win your conference, get in the tournament as a group of 6 school, and go on a Cinderella run. That doesn't happen in the college football playoff. It's not built for that to happen. And so if you're Houston, you've got to fight perception. And what's better or worse, next year's team, the year after's team, build off of this year's perception too, right? If we look at when Cincinnati made the college football playoff, it was not just the season that they had that year, but also the season prior. We look at what Central Florida did when they didn't make the college football playoff. It was because it was just a one-season sample size. You got to build this reputation up over seasons. This is a part of that, whether you like it or not, right? I also think it's important to say in this one, the second stake, I guess, you put on this game, or second one I'm putting on this game, is you've got to show as a program you can flush last week and move on. Texas Tech is going to blow out other teams. Frankly, I think in power rankings, since Utah is still fairly highly ranked in this conference, and you had the exact same score difference between you and Utah versus Texas Tech, right? Back to that transitive property thing. If Texas Tech is going to blow out other teams' conference as well, suddenly that kind of becomes the common card amongst all the other Big 12 teams. You need to have other cards in your deck, so to speak, right? Um, Frankly, and I mentioned this in the first segment, I would be way more nervous about this one under Dana Holgerson. I probably sat in the Dana Holgerson camp longer than most. I did get out of it for what it's worth, but I sat in it longer than most. And I still would not have wanted him to be coaching the program in this moment for a 11 a.m. road game coming off of being embarrassed on national television. I just wouldn't trust the mojo there. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't have good football players who could pull it off. I just don't know that I would have trusted him in that program to get that done. This program is different. Willie Fritz has proven to be a coach that moves things forward. And, you can honestly look at, with the exception of maybe UNLV, and I still maintain they were good before they had some roster shakeups around the redshirt period was being over. Um, with the exception of like UNLV in his first game out the gate, you can pretty much say they're winning the games they're supposed to win. This is one of those, right, for Houston, and so you got to go out and get it done. You got to show that you can flush last week, move on. It's a new week every Monday, and you got to show that you can do it. Now, at 11 a.m. kickoff on a Saturday, kind of weird. Yeah, you have to figure it out. Yeah. Last but not least, was to say for this team this weekend is that this would be win number 5. It would, and there have been periods of this program's history where that would be no big deal. They hadn't been that far away in the past, and I hope they're not that far away in the future. But in the present, that is a big deal, right? We've heard it used in bad faith, but we kind of know Houston fans can be fickle. There's just too much to do in the city of Houston between your own highly ranked basketball team, the Texans, the Rockets, and Kevin Durant, and all that stuff, and all the stuff there's doing downtown Houston, and so many. There's just a lot more entertainment options in Houston than there are in other college towns. And if you're not putting a good product on the field, people have limited time and dollars, and they find other things, right? So you've got to prove that you're worth people spending their time and dollars. So win number 5 is a big step towards that. You're 4-1 coming back home for homecoming instead of 4-2. That's a very different sell. Very different sell, right? The other part of this too is your last 2 years, you've had 4 wins in each of them. 4 wins in Dana Holgerson's last year, 4 wins in Willie Fritz's first year. It's time to move forward. That means winning more games. This is concretely the moment to do that, right? And I would stress that like the year before, their last year in the AAC, probably lost more games than they should have. Year before that, they had a really easy schedule, but they also probably should have beat Tech that year and still didn't, right? Like this program needs to start winning these games more often. And frankly, they need to start winning 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th and so on games more often. Now, if you win this game at 5-1 at the midway point of the regular season, you have half of a season to get a win and make a bowl game. And we'll talk about it when we get to that point. I don't want to jump the gun too much. Getting into a bowl is a big deal for a rebuilding program for a lot of reasons. And so that's a moment for this program as well. So a lot at stake this weekend, even though it feels like a game with Houston being such heavy favorites that it might not have those. But we'll be breaking it down after the game as well. Now, heads up, with this being an 11 a.m. kickoff and not quite knowing when it wraps up, there could be some chaos in the Ainsworth household about who's using what rooms. And the length of the post-game show may be shorter, may be abrupt, may be in a garage. Who knows? We're going to get something done, and we're going to be online live after the game to talk to you about it. But this is your heads up that the 11 a.m. daytime with the toddler and a bunch of people living in this house can kind of throw some things, right? So bear with me when that happens. We will be here live to talk to you at Locked On Coogs after the game. So hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know we're live. We're free and available on all podcast platforms as well. So if you're more of an audio person, the audio will be uploaded shortly after we're done talking. And make sure you're hitting 5 stars and all the great review things on those audio podcast platforms as well. It's the best way to help out the channel. We bring you free content every day. but you can help us out by hitting like, subscribe, etc. Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Cougs.